want to know which planet was causing your suffering? How about Earth?
Hey everyone, Brandflakes here, back with a new Tribe 9 video. For today's video, in celebration of Kazuki's release, we'll be covering his kit and my first impressions of him. For my first impressions of him, if I were to make a tier list right now, I would say he ranks very solidly between the A+ to S- tier, just because his kit does so much and he is really flexible. I'll get into more detail as I go on, but obviously don't take that A+/S- tier very seriously. I think everyone in this game goes between A to S+, and the game is fairly well balanced in that way, but that's another topic for another day. So I'll be putting some gameplay in the background as I talk about his abilities. No more of that, like, I show his numbers and then I show gameplay. I'll just combine them both and put the screenshots of his numbers up on the screen as I talk about them. So with that said, you'll hear the background music mute as I open the character screen on my end to talk about it, but hopefully that makes it more straightforward. So very first of all, most importantly, Kazuki is a character that has his own primary unique resource called memory. And this is something that you start out with max stacks of, which is 16, and it gets consumed every time you use his secondary attack and his strategy skill. Now, the only way you can regenerate memory is by either using his ultimate ability, which I believe gives you 8 to 13 stacks of memory, depending on how many points you have in his potential skill, which I'll cover later, or by having his third Transcendence, which requires you to have 4 total copies of Kazuki, and that's going to give you 1 memory stack every time you hit something 20 times, or have like 20 instances of damage, I think is the better way to put it. So first of all, his primary attack isn't going to consume enemy memory. It's going to be a very strong hitting, very hard hitting, and very high break value ability. I think Kazuki has some of the highest base damage I've seen on any character in the game, and his break values are also very high. And I think the reason why that is, spoiler, is because his strategy ability doesn't really do any damage or provide any break. So his primary attack and secondary attack are really overtuned in that regard, so that he's an actual DPS character if you choose to play him that way. And obviously I'll cover his strategy attack or strategy skill in a bit. His secondary attack is going to be one of the ways you consume memory. It's going to be a 2-part skill or attack, and you have to reactivate it in order to get that second attack. Both attacks have the exact same damage and break values, but the animation time and the brain data, animation, and hitboxes are very different. And you have to remember that you can't save the second attack by dodging, blocking, parrying, or walking. You have to immediately cast it, or else Kazuki will go immediately back into his first stage of a secondary attack, which is another memory consumption. So if you're trying to kind of spam both, you're going to want to make sure that you're actually in a good spot to do so, or else you'll kind of not really waste the second cast, but it won't be as efficient as it might be. I think there is some value in trying to force a second cast and maybe getting hit anyways so that you can get some more efficiency out of your memory consumption, but it's not really a big deal when it comes down to it. And I think his secondary attack is the main way he has such high break ability rating. But again, just remember that you can only cast this 16 times if you don't have your tier 3 Transcendence or you don't ult at any point in the fight. His counterattack is pretty normal. I think out of all these things, this is the most underwhelming, but that's pretty standard because counterattacks are just kind of these things you use to counter your enemy. So moving on to his strategy skill, Kazuki is going to be, I think, very similar to Mew. I actually don't own Mew, so I'm kind of talking out of my butt here, but he essentially just summons a thing on the ground that does something by itself. Now, very uniquely, well, I guess first of all, this does consume 4 memory to cast. So you can only use this when you're above 4 memory, and that's what that little line is going to be on his memory gauge. That's 4 memory stacks, and once you go below that, until you go above it, you can't use his strategy skill anymore. And so the only way you can summon this totem is going to be by chain attacking, which I'll cover in a bit. So essentially, the summon is going to be something called a deflex server. As far as I can tell, what the summon does is that every now and then it'll pulse and deal a very small amount of damage. And then when it does its pulse, it'll also provide you a shield. It's a pretty big shield on Kazuki, but it's a very small shield on base on your party members. And this shield is going to be a 30% at base reduction, damage reduction shield. And the amount it can shield is going to be, again, based on whether it's Kazuki himself or his party members, based on Kazuki's main HP. Now, it's important to note, I found this out recently myself, but shields in Tribe 9 aren't like a separate HP bar for your character. It's actually just how much reduction or how much damage you can reduce in total until it runs out. So it's kind of hard to put into words, but essentially imagine that you can reduce 100 total damage at a 25% damage reduction rate. And then let's say that someone hits you for 200 damage. You're still going to take real damage. You're not immuning the 100 damage completely. What ends up happening instead is that the 200 damage gets hit, and since you're reducing 25% of that, you take 50. You take 50 less from that, so you still take 150 damage, but then that 50 is deducted from the 100 HP from the shield. It's a little complicated, but I think once you watch the gameplay and you notice how it works yourself, it'll make more sense. But that's just me trying to explain it in a very brief way. So moving on, just to skip on to the chain skill. Kazuki's chain skill is going to be a pretty standard chain skill, except it also summons a totem. And as far as I'm aware, this is the only way you can summon a totem without ever using his memory gauge. So even when you're low on memory, as long as you break somebody, you can still gain value from his totem, which I believe should still scale off of the totem from his strategy skill, which I guess is a moot point because if you put levels into his first potential, like the generic character potential, which ranks up your action damage and skill levels, you'll notice that it doesn't actually work on the non-action damage part of the totem. Everything there is just static, which is, I guess, makes sense. I'm assuming all summons are like that. And then finally, Kazuki's ultimate is going to be essentially map-wide attack. Again, this is how you're going to regain most of your memory if you don't have a Transcendence 3 Kazuki. And he also has a bonus effect where if you reach max memory, so like let's say that you're at 17, or was it 16 cap? So let's say that you're at 8, 9, or higher. When you use a skill, Kazuki will gain a massive attack buff based on his own max HP. So this kind of contributes to him being able to be played as a main DPS, because if you stack a lot of attack stat, a lot of defense stat, and a lot of crit stat, or whatever, make sure you think is correct, you'll find him doing a lot of damage, especially after the way they rework tension gain in this game, where now if you're the aggressor, where if you hit the enemies in general, you always start at tension 2. You can actually start out with a ton of damage on Kazuki because you immediately ult, and then you immediately start with that massive buff of where you gain 10% of your max HP as raw attack value. So it's pretty sick. Personally, I use this more as a fast trash mob clear. I know that there's the attack buff that happens afterwards, but I think this attack buff doesn't actually affect the damage of the ult itself, so I'm not really worried about stacking HP on him. I'm just personally putting like crit attack and crit damage on him. And you'll see that I'll probably do like a slew of clips where I'm just ramming the ult button the moment I spawn to a fight, and it wipes the map. And this is really helpful for fractal fights, but I think I've skipped ahead a bit because I want to talk about that in the gameplay section of the video, so just remember that as I repeat that later there. So with that said, we can jump right into the potentials for Kazuki. The first three are very standard. First one obviously is going to be leveling up your action level on all of your skills. Second one is your raw base stats for HP, defense, and stamina. And the third one is going to be support. Support seems very, very worthless on Kazuki, so I wouldn't bother with that third one unless you're trying to do an XP build. And then the first one, again, will help a lot with your primary, secondary, and ultimate skills and chain attacks. However, it won't affect your totem as much as you think it might. It'll only affect the, I guess, actually, yeah, now that I think about it, all it affects is you placing the totem. So it's not even really buffing the totem or the strategy skill at all. You get like a tiny, tiny minuscule damage buff to hitting somebody with it. So yeah, don't expect much from that angle. But again, if you're playing main DPS, you're going to put points in the first generic character potential anyways. Kazuki's first character unique potential is going to be increasing the damage reduction rate of his deflex shield. This scales by 3% per level, so you can bring his deflex shield, I believe, from 30% up to 45%, which is a pretty solid increase. You're increasing the effectiveness by 50% overall, 15% by raw numbers, but 50% in effectiveness. So you'll almost reduce half the damage taken if there's available shielding for it. And then the final potential for him, his second character unique potential, is going to be increasing your memory gain when you use overclock. So this essentially goes up to, again, 13. He goes from regenerating 8 memory to regenerating 13 memory. So this lets you play a lot more freely with how much memory you can burn on your secondary attack. And also, it lets you achieve the overclock effect of overclock a lot more easily because you don't have to worry about going as low as you would usually worry about. You just get it from just playing the game normally and not going super excessive on the consumption. And then his Transcendences, I guess we can just cover this really briefly. His first one is going to make his resistance of the deflex shield increase by 25% of his own maximum HP. I think resistance for shielding terms is going to be the raw value that, like the flat amount that you can shield up to. So 25% of max HP is going to double his personal shield, and then almost triple or quadruple his shield given to allies. His third Transcendence, the one I've been talking about a lot, is going to be the one where when you hit someone 20 times, you get a memory stack, which is pretty good. And then the final Transcendence is going to be giving his ultimate an additional buff, where when you use his ultimate, you also increase your own break dealt by 50%. So all those 500 break values you're dealing with your secondary, you're going to deal with 750, which is a massive buff. So Lane for Kazuki seems really worthwhile if you're going to be using him as a primary ultimate spammer and a main DPS. So not bad if you really like his character design. Now, I could talk about tension cards, but I'm not really sure how I would talk about them considering that I don't own many myself and I'm not playing him to his fullest potential. But I would personally say that any tension card that interacts with Kingship seems to be pretty good because it looks like a lot of Kingship cards are directly connected to ultimate skill damage, which he's going to be a very prominent user of. And also, I think Kingship is based on giving buffs to allies, and since his shield should count as a buff to allies, he should be able to proc Kingship pretty easily himself. The main thing is that a lot of these Kingship cards require tension level 2, so when it comes to dedicated boss fights like the Shark, Fractal Rift or Fractal Vice bosses and the like, where you start with tension 1 instead of tension 2, you might have it a bit rough. But for all of like the mid bosses in Fractal Rift, where you can aggro them like the roaming bosses, you'll be able to get a lot of efficiency off of that. And also, since Kazuki's a break character, you can always break the enemy bosses really quickly to hit tension 2 really quickly, so the detriment of starting at tension 1 isn't even that bad. And then obviously we have the Patimons that you can use on him. I think that if you're going the main DPS route, like I said earlier, you can actually go for an interesting build where you stack a lot of maximum HP to get a better buff off of overcapping your memory with your ultimate. Otherwise, you can't really go wrong with crit damage and attack because it helps you do more damage in general. There is a tension card for Kazuki specifically where he, I guess like the one he's on banner with, that gives him a ton of crit value. So you could say that crit rate is pretty redundant on him because you'll be able to hit 100% crit very easily with full party, his own tension card, and like one crit line. But if you're not going to be pulling for that, then go ahead and put a few crit lines on him just so he's more consistent when he's ulting and autoing. Now for the gameplay part, as I said earlier, I'm using Kazuki as an ult bot. The reason why I have him so highly rated is because he is very reminiscent of characters that just make farming a lot easier. And obviously, Tribe 9 is a game where farming is either boss related, where you're trying to do a lot of single target damage, or it's like you one-shotting mobs in the overworld where you just one-shot them and you don't even get into a fight. So you might be saying, oh, okay, so why do I care that Kazuki is really good at clearing trash? It's because Fractal Vice exists, and as far as I'm aware, you can't skip fights at Fractal Vice. So this guy, even on his first day, has been saving me a ton of time and a lot of my sanity by simply allowing me to like run in. Again, tension rework allows you to start tension 2 and fights you're allowed to start fights in. And with that, I'm able to wipe a lot of mobs way faster than I kind of feel like I should be able to on the characters I have. And obviously, this isn't like the biggest deal. Like I can always use a Noki to clear them in like 10-15 seconds more than I could with Kazuki. But those 10-15 seconds per fight in Fractal Rift, where every week you have to fight through like 150 stages total if you want to explore every single path, it's a big time saver, and I like him a lot for that. And obviously, Tokyo/Akatsuki games can always release more content where trash mob fights are forced as well. And having Kazuki with a global, semi-global ult, I guess you call it, makes that really easy because not every character in the game has an ultimate that can hit more than one target that easily. I know that like someone like Yo, if you walk correctly, you're able to ult and hit multiple targets. And I know that also Kazuki doesn't really have a true global ult. I think the first cast is global, but the second cast requires you to like have him aim a certain direction, so it's not like a true finisher that can like consistently wipe every enemy unless he's way stronger than them. but it saves a lot of time because, again, I'm an Inoki main. Inoki does have an AoE ult, but the AoE hitbox is so small, it's irrelevant. And overkilling an enemy by like 200k, it doesn't help me kill the rest of the mobs faster. So this blue-haired hacker man, he has been doing me a great service, and I'm pretty happy I pulled him. I used 140, or yeah, I rolled 120 times rather. I got a Inoki dupe on my first pity hit, and then I got Kazuki like 40 rolls later. And I'm very, very happy. I was a little concerned that I wouldn't be satisfied with the roll, and I only pulled him out of Obligation and for the gacha, serotonin. But after playing him, I have no regrets. So I hope your experience with Kazuki, if you chose to pull for him, is as good as mine was. Hopefully you were luckier than I was for pulling for him. And yeah, have a good time building him out, and let me know if you guys have a lot of fun playing him. I'll see you guys in the next video. Have a good day or night, wherever you are, and I'll talk to you guys next time. Bye-bye.